Jesus Christ, half the wing's gone. The co-pilot's scream cuts through the smoke-filled cockpit. Oxygen masks hiss. The B-17 lurches, dropping 3,000 feet in seconds. Lieutenant Clarence "Lucky" Harper grips the yoke, eyes burning through the frost on the glass. Outside, the right wing is a nightmare. Flak has torn through the main spar, fuel burning in a jagged arc. Metal flaps whip like ribbons in a hurricane. "Feather 3, kill the fire," Harper yells. The engineer slams switches. One engine coughs, sputters, dies. The plane lists hard right. The altimeter spins down. 20,000 feet. 18,000, 15,000. Over Oschersleben, January 11th, 1944. A day that was supposed to be routine. 600 B-17s had crossed the channel that morning. By noon, over 100 would never come back. Inside Lucky Lady 2, the air reeks of oil, smoke, and fear. Harper's co-pilot, barely conscious, clutches a bleeding arm. The radio operator mutters a prayer, trying to raise anyone on the network. Nothing but static. "Navigator bearings," Harper shouts. "Don't have one. Instruments are fried." He steadies the yoke with both hands, sweat freezing on his face. The fortress groans like a living thing, shaking itself apart. Through the cracked windscreen, the sky is black with flak bursts. German FW-190s circle like vultures. Harper makes a decision no sane pilot would make. He keeps flying. He pushes throttle 1 and 2 forward, counteracting the drag from the torn wing. The plane straightens, barely. "Sir, we can't make it," the engineer gasps. "We'll make it," Harper growls. "As long as she flies, we live." The intercom crackles, the tail gunner's voice, thin but calm. "We still got control, Skipper. She's bleeding, but she's flying." Harper breathes deep. For a moment, the fortress levels out, trailing smoke but holding steady. He glances out the window, half a wing missing. Any other plane would have already folded, spinning into the ground. But the B-17 doesn't. Its remaining structure flexes, adapts. The wing root holds. The trim stabilizers somehow still function. The Germans close in. 2 fighters dart from the clouds, opening fire. Tracers rip through the sky. The top turret gunner fires back, his twin 50s blazing. "They're peeling off!" The crew cheers, ragged, terrified laughter echoing through the intercom. Harper's eyes narrow. "They'll be back!" He glances down to fuel leaking fast. No chance to climb, no chance to turn. Just one chance. West. He banks the fortress toward the dying sun. Toward England. Every creak of the frame sounds like a countdown to death. But the controls still respond. The B-17, torn in half, still listens. 30 seconds of silence. Just the engine hum and wind tearing past the cockpit. Then Harper whispers to no one in particular. "Maybe the plane, maybe God. Let's see what you're really made of." The fortress, defying physics and reason, steadies on its course home. Back home, Americans called it the Flying Fortress. The name alone sounded immortal, like something that couldn't die. Newsreels showed smiling crews waving from airfields, bombers returning with wings full of holes, headlines that said, "Fortress returns home on one engine." To the public, the B-17 was an angel of steel, a machine too strong to fail. But for the men who flew them, that myth didn't exist. They knew the truth. Every takeoff could be their last. Harper remembered watching those newsreels too, back before his first mission. The grainy film, the brave music, the proud narrator promising, "Our boys in the sky are unstoppable." It looked heroic. Then he flew his first sortie over Germany and watched 3 fortresses vanish in seconds, turned into black dust against a blue sky. By 1943, the statistics were brutal. A bomber crew's average life expectancy was 11 missions, and Harper was on his 17th. They called it the aluminum overcast, a formation of hundreds of B-17s filling the air, glinting like a silver storm. From the ground, it looked unstoppable, but from inside, it was hell. Every man could hear the invisible enemy, flak, the dull gut punch sound of shrapnel hitting metal, the cockpit shaking like a freight train, the smell of burnt oil. They didn't talk about fear. They just listened, waiting for the next hit. When propaganda called the B-17 indestructible, it wasn't a lie. It was hope. But hope had a weight, and it sat on every man inside the fortress. In the freezing skies over Europe, oxygen lines froze solid. Engines caught fire without warning. One hole in the fuselage could turn the 50-degree air into a blade that cut through gloves, skin, lungs. Men didn't just risk dying, they risked freezing to death while still alive. Harper's crew didn't feel like knights of the air. They felt like survivors inside a steel coffin. Every mission, they watched the horizon for parachutes, black dots against the white clouds. Each dot meant a friend had gone down. And still, they climbed into the next plane. Not because they believed in the propaganda, because they believed in each other. In the ready room before missions, men joked loudly, too loudly. It was the kind of laughter that hid terror. Someone always said, "The fortress will bring us back." And for a few seconds, everyone let themselves believe it. Now, in the cockpit of the shattered Lucky Lady 2, Harper was learning what that really meant. The fortress wasn't invincible. It just refused to die quickly. The B-17's strength wasn't only in its rivets or its frame. It was in the idea behind it. That even broken things can keep flying if the people inside won't give up. Harper looked at the damaged control panel. Half the gauges were dead. The smell of smoke filled his mask. But the engine still hummed, low and steady, like a heartbeat. He thought of the men back in Seattle who built her, the women who riveted these wings by hand, the engineers who believed a plane could carry 10 souls across hell and still bring them home. He gripped the yoke tighter. "Flying fortresses don't fall," he whispered. "Not today." Before Harper's crippled fortress ever touched the clouds over Germany, its story had begun half a world away, in a place that smelled of oil, metal, and coffee. Seattle, Washington, 1943. Rows of women in denim overalls stood under the vast, echoing ceiling of the Boeing plant, riveting metal skins under fluorescent light. Sparks rained down like fireflies. The rhythmic clatter of tools was like a pulse, the sound of a nation beating as one. The flying fortress wasn't born in a secret lab or a general's office. It was built by hands, millions of them. Housewives, students, farmers' sons, mechanics, immigrants. Boeing's assembly lines stretched the length of football fields. Wings, fuselages, engines, all sliding along rails like parts in a living organism. By mid-1944, one B-17 was rolling off the line every 68 minutes. They didn't just build machines. They built lifeboats for men they would never meet. At Station 32, a young woman named Ellen riveted the same joint on every wing panel for 12 hours a day. She never saw combat, never heard flak burst, but she understood perfectly what her work meant. She kept a photograph of her brother, a B-17 tail gunner, taped beside her tools. When inspectors praised her flawless rivet lines, she'd just say, "I make sure he can come home." The B-17's secret wasn't armor, it was architecture. Unlike other bombers, its wing wasn't one piece. It was a lattice of spars and ribs designed to carry stress even after massive damage. Engineers called it redundant structure. To Harper, thousands of miles away, that redundancy was the reason he was still alive. The B-17 could lose nearly half a wing's surface and stay in the air. It could survive engine fires, shredded control cables, even partial tail loss. Not because it was indestructible, but because every square inch was designed to fail slowly. Back in Seattle, engineers studied wrecked fortresses that limped home from Europe. They didn't mourn them. They dissected them, measuring, sketching, improving. Every hole from flak became a lesson, every bullet scar a blueprint for survival. Harper didn't know their names. Men like Kelly Johnson, who pioneered airflow modeling, or E. Gifford Emery, who redesigned the spar system. But their fingerprints were in every bolt holding his wing together right now, thousands of feet above the North Sea. Across the Atlantic, England's airfields roared with morning engines. Hundreds of fortresses lined up in formation, sunlight flashing on silver skin. From the ground, it looked like confidence. From the cockpit, it looked like trust. Trust in the people who had built every screw, every cable, every inch of metal that might stand between them and the ground. Harper's plane, the Lucky Lady II, had rolled out of Boeing's Plant 2 just 6 months earlier. Its frame had passed through the hands of over 3,000 workers. Now, half a world away, those same hands were holding it together, invisible but unbreakable. He remembered the words of a mechanic back at base, spoken after their first mission. "Treat her right, Lieutenant. She's more than aluminum. She's all of us." And now, as smoke leaked from the torn wing, Harper realized just how literal that was. The Fortress wasn't just a bomber. It was America, engineered into flight. In the air war over Europe, survival was arithmetic, not courage, not even luck, just math. Brutal, impersonal math. Harper had learned that lesson the hard way. By January 1944, the 8th Air Force had lost over 4,000 bombers. Each fortress carried 10 men. That meant 40,000 names, fathers, brothers, sons, erased in less than 2 years. The numbers haunted every mission briefing. Each red pin on the wall map marked a crew that didn't come back. Each black cross on the flight board meant another fortress gone. The cold truth was that American victory wasn't built on invincibility. It was built on replacement. Every time a bomber fell in flames, another rolled off the assembly line in Seattle, Burbank, or Long Beach. Every pilot who went down was replaced by a 20-year-old fresh from flight school. Every gunner lost meant another drafted mechanic with 2 weeks of training would take his place. It wasn't cruelty. It was necessity. The Allies weren't winning because they bled less. They were winning because they could afford to bleed. Harper understood that now, sitting in the cockpit of a plane that shouldn't be flying. He thought of the crews who hadn't made it, the ones who went down in the channel, the ones who burned before they hit the ground, the ones who vanished with no parachutes. Back home, people called them heroes. Up here, they were statistics. And yet in that cold calculus of war, something remarkable had happened. The men inside those bombers had refused to be just numbers. They made rituals out of routine. Lucky coins, half-burned cigars, cards taped to dashboards, anything to feel human inside the machine. They gave their planes names. Memphis Belle, 909. Heavenly Body, Lucky Lady 2. Each name turned cold metal into something personal, something alive. When the B-17 formations climbed to 25,000 feet, it wasn't just hardware in motion. It was faith, the belief that if they kept flying, kept fighting, kept replacing what was lost, they'd eventually tip the scales. Back at base, intelligence officers calculated that if losses stayed below 5% per mission, the bombing campaign could continue indefinitely. 5% didn't sound like much, until you realized it meant 1 out of every 20 planes wouldn't come home. And for every man like Harper who survived, there was another who didn't even get a chance to know what killed him. The mission briefings always ended the same way. "Gentlemen, we expect heavy resistance. Maintain formation. Trust your fortress." It wasn't just orders. It was a prayer disguised as discipline. Now, as Harper's B-17 limped toward England, he realized the truth beneath all the math. The numbers didn't decide who lived. The men did. Because even when the odds said they were already dead, they kept their hands on the controls. They held the line between arithmetic and survival. He looked over his shoulder. His crew, bloodied, silent, exhausted, were still doing their jobs. The gunner was checking ammo. The engineer was patching fuel lines with torn fabric. No panic. just purpose. And that, Harper thought, was the real equation of victory. Steel plus spirit equals survival. At 17,000 feet, somewhere between Bremen and the North Sea, the fortress groaned like a wounded animal. The number 3 engine was gone, its propeller feathered and still smoking. The fourth was coughing black soot. The oxygen lines were cut. Half the instruments were dead. But the sky was too quiet. For hours, Harper had been surrounded by the roar of the formation, the thunder of hundreds of Wright Cyclone engines turning the air into vibration. Now, nothing. He looked around. Empty sky, no wingmen, no escorts, no formation. Just the wind and the sound of metal flexing where the right wing should have been. "Radio check," he called. Static answered. The radio man shook his head. The antenna was gone. They were deaf and blind over enemy territory. Below them stretched a sea of clouds. Beneath that, Germany. Flak towers. Fighters. Death. Harper felt his heart slow. He wasn't afraid anymore, just focused. "We'll hold her level. Trim it. Keep it light." His voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. The co-pilot nodded, blood dried on his temple. The engineer leaned forward, shouting over the engine noise. "We're losing fuel fast, Skipper." "How long?" "Maybe 30 minutes. 40 if we cut the power." Harper nodded. "Then we make it count." The crew didn't need more words. Each man knew his role. Each man had seen this before. The slow unraveling of a plane trying to die. They began stripping weight, tossing out machine guns, ammo, radios, armor plates, anything that wasn't bolted down. Every pound meant a few more seconds of flight. In the bomb bay, the gunner whispered a prayer. He wasn't religious, not really, but it was what his father had taught him. If you can't fix it, fly it as far as God lets you. Harper looked through the cracked windscreen. The clouds broke for a moment, revealing the North Sea glinting below like cold glass. England was somewhere beyond that horizon, 300 miles of empty air. He thought of his crew back at base, the empty bunks that would tell stories before the telegrams arrived. He thought of the Boeing workers who had built the Lucky Lady, too. He thought of his wife, who had kissed him at dawn and said, "Promise me you'll come back." The fortress shuddered again. The remaining wing flexed like a living thing, the metal skin trembling against the strain. Harper put his hand on the throttle. "We're going to make it home," he said quietly. No one answered. They were all too tired to believe, but too stubborn to doubt. Then, a burst of flak. Not near, but close enough to see. The concussion shook what was left of the wing. The ball turret gunner screamed, "Fighters! 6 o'clock!" 3 FW-190s dove out of the sun. Harper's hands moved on instinct. "Gunners, open up!" The twin 50s chattered, tracers streaking through the pale light. The fortress rocked as the waist gunners' rounds tore into the sky. But there was no formation to protect them now, no escort cover. Just one broken plane against 3 predators. For 5 minutes, the sky became fire. The Germans circled, diving and climbing, testing their prey. The Lucky Lady, too, answered every pass with lead. Smoke trailed from one fighter, hit but still flying. Then a flash. The tail gunner's voice broke through the intercom. "Got one! He's on fire!" Harper didn't cheer. He couldn't. His mind was fixed on the horizon. "Hold her steady," he whispered. "Just hold her steady." When the last Focke wolf broke off, disappearing toward the clouds, Harper realized something strange. The silence had returned. The kind of silence that only comes after you've survived what should have killed you. They were still flying, barely. But they were alive. And as long as the fortress could hold together, they weren't done yet. The horizon was fading, the sun burning low behind clouds that looked like ash. The Lucky Lady, too, limped on, its shadow crawling across the North Sea. One propeller turned unevenly, wobbling like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Inside, the crew barely spoke. The intercom crackled, but no one had the strength to fill the silence. "Fuel's gone in 3 tanks," the engineer said quietly. His hands were trembling. "We're sipping fumes." "How far to England?" Harper asked. The navigator checked his chart. His pencil shook. 100 miles, maybe less if the wind holds. Maybe. That word hung in the cabin like a ghost. They had been flying for hours on instinct and stubbornness. The right wing was shredded, the control cables nearly cut through. Every vibration made the metal groan like it wanted to give up. The crew's faces were gray, streaked with oil and exhaustion. The smell of burnt hydraulic fluid filled the air. Below them, the sea was black and cold. It looked peaceful from up here, like glass, but every man knew what waited in it. Hypothermia, drowning. The silence of water swallowing breath and memory. "Should we ditch?" the co-pilot asked finally. His voice cracked. Harper stared straight ahead. "Not yet." He couldn't explain it. That small, irrational voice that kept saying, "You're not done." The ball turret gunner had crawled up to the main deck, his face pale, his body shaking. "Captain," he said, "if we go down, I'm not going to make it out. That hatch jams." Harper looked at him, then at the shredded metal walls, the bullet holes, the blood-streaked floor. "You'll make it," he said. "We all will." No one believed him, but they wanted to. Minutes passed. Then the co-pilot shouted, "Smoke ahead!" Harper squinted through the haze. Distant plumes, faint and gray. Not smoke. Chimneys. England. The crew stirred. Someone laughed. Someone cried. Someone whispered, "We made it." But the engines didn't care about hope. The last one coughed, sputtered, and finally quit. The fortress dropped, heavy and sudden, altimeter spinning down. "Brace!" Harper shouted. The men grabbed whatever they could. The sea rushed up to meet them. The impact hit like a bomb. The nose slammed, water flooding through the bombardier's hatch. The plane groaned, tilted, and began to sink. Harper fought the buckled door, water to his waist. The crew clawed toward the life rafts, shouting each other's names. The sea was freezing, cutting through flight suits like knives. But they were alive. The Lucky Lady, too, sank beneath them, the wing vanishing under foam. Harper watched it go, the machine that had carried them through fire, air, and sky. He whispered, "Thank you," as if the fortress could still hear him. They floated for hours, huddled together in silence, the wind howling around them. Somewhere beyond the mist, they saw a shape. A British rescue launch, its lights flashing faint and golden. When the sailors pulled them aboard, Harper could barely stand. One medic looked at him and said, "You flew that thing across the sea?" Harper nodded. "She flew us." No one corrected him. No one laughed. The crew just sat on the deck, wrapped in blankets, watching the waves swallow the last traces of their fortress. In that moment, Harper understood something simple and eternal. Survival wasn't victory. It was gratitude. When the rescue boat reached the English coast, dawn was breaking. The cliffs of Dover glowed pale orange in the mist, like the edge of another world. Harper's crew sat wrapped in wool blankets, faces blank, eyes glassy. They looked like ghosts who hadn't realized they were alive. Ambulances waited at the dock. Medics helped them off the boat, one by one, gentle hands guiding trembling legs. Reporters were already there, snapping photographs. "Heroes of the Air War," one headline would read by morning. "Crew survives impossible flight." But Harper didn't feel like a hero. He felt empty. At the debriefing room in the 8th Air Force Base, the intelligence officer asked routine questions. "What altitude did you take flak?" What vector did you lose formation? How many enemy aircraft engaged you? Harper answered mechanically. Coordinates, headings, times, all facts, no emotion. The officer looked up from his clipboard. Lieutenant, it's a miracle you made it back. Harper didn't respond. He just stared at his hands, raw and oil-stained. No, sir, he said finally. It was math, metal, and mercy. In the mess hall, his crew sat at a long wooden table. The cook brought them hot coffee, eggs, and bacon, their first real meal in days. The smell made one of the gunners start crying. The others followed, silent tears over steaming plates. No speeches, no laughter, just the sound of forks and quiet breathing. When the food was gone, Harper reached into his flight jacket and pulled out a small scrap of aluminum, a fragment of the Lucky Lady II's wing, torn off before the sea swallowed it. He placed it in the center of the table. "She got us home," he said softly. No one disagreed. That night, the base commander visited their barracks. "You boys will be heading home soon," he said. "Stateside. You've earned it." The word home hung heavy in the air. For Harper, home was a dream wrapped in exhaustion. He lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling, hearing the engines that weren't there. Every vibration, every hum lived in his bones. He closed his eyes and saw the ocean, the falling altimeter, the moment before impact. He didn't dream of dying. He dreamed of flying. A few weeks later, they were in uniform again, stepping off a transport ship in New York Harbor. The skyline rose like a promise. Crowds cheered. A brass band played. But Harper felt disconnected, watching it all through glass. The city looked too clean, too alive. He wondered how the rest of the world could move on when the sky still felt like it was burning. At a press interview, a reporter asked, "Lieutenant, what's it like to stare death in the face and win?" Harper smiled faintly. "You don't win against death," he said. "You just fly longer than he expected." The quote made the papers. His face appeared in magazines, his story retold in radio broadcasts. But in private, Harper avoided the spotlight. He visited the families of his lost squadron mates, wrote letters for the men who never made it back, and kept the piece of aluminum in his jacket pocket. For him, the real victory wasn't medals or fame. It was that quiet moment on the rescue boat, when he realized the machine that had carried him through hell had done what it was built to do. It kept him alive. And somewhere, deep down, he understood that maybe, just maybe, humanity had learned something from the math of destruction. How to build something strong enough to endure it. By the summer of 1945, the world had gone quiet. The factories that once shook the ground with the rhythm of production slowed, then stopped. The Boeing lines that had once birthed a flying fortress every hour now stood empty, their echoing halls filled with dust and silence. The war machine, after years of endless motion, finally slept. Harper found himself standing in one of those hangars in Seattle months later. Rows of unused bombers stretched into the distance, their aluminum skins gleaming under pale light. Some were being dismantled, stripped for parts, turned into scrap. He ran his hand along the cold metal of a decommissioned B-17 and felt something like grief. This was the machine that had carried men across the world, built by people who would never know their names. Now it was being unmade, piece by piece, bolt by bolt. The smell of oil still hung in the air, but the sound was gone. No hammers, no rivets, just memory. Ellen, the young woman who had worked on the Lucky Lady II, was there too. She wore civilian clothes now, her hair tied back with a ribbon instead of a factory bandana. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" she said softly. "All this power, just sitting still." Harper nodded. "We built an army that could fly," he said, "and now we don't know what to do with it." In towns across America, it was the same. The same factories that had built wings and guns now built cars and refrigerators. Men who had learned to repair engines in war turned their skills to fixing tractors. Women who had riveted bombers now sewed dresses, ran shops, raised children. The nation had turned its weapon into a tool. But for the men who had lived in the belly of the machine, the silence was unbearable. Harper couldn't sleep without the low hum of engines. He woke at night sweating, dreaming of the sea and the sound of the fortress falling apart around him. The doctors called it combat fatigue. Harper called it the price of coming home. One afternoon, he visited a veterans hospital near Spokane. The ward was filled with men like him. Pilots, gunners, mechanics were all trying to live with the quiet. Some couldn't stop talking about the war. Others refused to say a word. He met one man sitting by a window staring at the sky. "You miss it too?" Harper asked. The man nodded slowly. "It's strange," he said. "Up there, everything made sense. You knew what to do. Down here, it's harder." Harper looked out the window with him. A flock of planes crossed high overhead. Civilian transports now, not bombers. The sound made his chest ache. "Maybe we just have to learn how to fly different," he said. That night, Harper wrote in his journal, "War teaches men to survive, but peace asks them to live. One is mechanical, the other is human." Months later, he took a job as a flight instructor teaching young pilots who had never seen combat. He taught them not just how to fly, but how to listen. To the hum of the engine, the whisper of the wings, the balance between machine and man. Sometimes after class, he'd stand on the runway and watch the new planes take off. Sleeker, faster. But none of them had the weight of the fortress. None of them carried ghosts. The sky was quiet again. But to Harper, it was never empty. Years passed. The noise of the war faded, but its echoes never really stopped. Harper had aged into quiet routine, teaching, flying, fixing planes that didn't shoot anymore. Yet sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he could still hear it. The rattle of machine guns, the creak of aluminum straining against gravity, the distant thunder of the engines that refused to quit. In 1952, Harper drove through Kansas on a cross-country trip. On the edge of a small town, a rusted shape caught his eye. A broken B-17 fuselage sitting in a farmer's field. Its nose was missing, its wings cut short, grass growing through its bomb bay. A relic of victory turned to scrap. He pulled over, stepped into the weeds, and laid his hand on the cool, corroded skin. "Hello, old girl," he whispered. The farmer came out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Picked her up after the war," he said. "Kids climb inside sometimes, pretend they're flying. I keep meaning to haul it off, but somehow I never do." Harper smiled faintly. "She deserves to stay," he said. "She's done enough flying." He climbed into the cockpit, or what was left of it. The control yoke was gone, the glass shattered. But the smell was still there, that faint mix of oil, dust, and history. He sat down on the metal seat, closed his eyes, and let the memories come. He saw his crew again, the laughter before takeoff, the fear when flak tore through the fuselage, the stubborn heartbeat of engines that refused to die, the way the Lucky Lady, too, had fallen into the sea like a warrior too proud to surrender. He remembered the mechanic who'd stayed late to patch her up before every mission, the factory worker who'd riveted her skin, the woman who'd built her wing, never knowing she'd one day save 8 men she'd never meet. That's when Harper understood. The B-17 wasn't just a plane. It was America itself, built by millions, flown by thousands, and carried by the faith of people who believed in something bigger than fear. He sat in silence, the wind whistling through the broken frame, and whispered, "You weren't just a machine. You were a promise." As he left, the farmer called after him, "You flew one of these, didn't you?" Harper turned, smiled, and said, "No, she flew me." That night, he stayed in a small roadside motel. Before bed, he took the piece of aluminum he always carried, the fragment of the Lucky Lady Two's wing, and set it on the nightstand. He stared at it for a long time, the way you look at something sacred. In the years that followed, he began speaking at schools, veterans' halls, and air shows. He didn't talk about killing or missions or numbers. He talked about teamwork, courage, and faith in craft. Every plane was a miracle, he would tell them, because every plane was built by free hands. His story became less about survival and more about what survival meant, the unbreakable chain between those who built, those who flew, and those who dreamed. And in that way, long after the last B-17 was scrapped or displayed in a museum, the fortress never really stopped flying. It lived in the stories, in men like Harper, and in the nation that learned to build not just machines of war, but machines of hope. The years rolled forward and the world moved on. Jet engines replaced propellers, new wars were fought with missiles and machines that no one even touched, and the skies filled again with thunder. This time, digital, invisible, almost impersonal. But for Harper, the old sounds of pistons and props remained sacred. They belonged to a time when every flight was a gamble and every pilot knew the price of coming home. He retired quietly to a small ranch outside Amarillo, Texas. The horizon there was endless, not so different from the sky. Sometimes, when the wind picked up and the grass rippled like ocean waves, he swore he could still hear the hum of the Lucky Lady Two gliding over the plains. Every year, on the anniversary of the day she went down, Harper would take out the piece of aluminum from his pocket, polish it, and set it by the window. His wife, Ellen, the same factory worker he had met all those years ago, never asked why. She understood. The fragment wasn't just metal. It was memory, promise, and proof. One evening, a local historian came to interview him for a veterans project. "Lieutenant Harper," the man asked, "after everything you went through, what do you think America's greatest weapon really was?" Harper looked out at the setting sun, the light turning the Texas fields gold. "It wasn't the guns," he said slowly, "and it wasn't the bombs." He held up the piece of the Lucky Lady Two, turning it in the light. "It was this, the hands that built it, the minds that imagined it, the faith that said we could do the impossible if we worked together." The historian nodded, scribbling notes. Harper smiled faintly. "People think war is won by courage," he continued. "But courage is useless without creation. What saved us wasn't our will to fight. It was our will to build." That night, after the historian left, Harper sat on the porch with Ellen. The stars came out one by one, clean and sharp in the dark Texas sky. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You ever think about flying again?" she asked softly. He chuckled. "Every day," he said. "But maybe the point wasn't flying. Maybe it was learning how to land." Silence settled between them, warm and full. In that quiet, Harper thought about all the men who never made it home, and all the people who never saw their work come to life. The welders, riveters, machinists, and dreamers who'd built the wings that carried him through fire. He realized, finally, that the true story of the fortress wasn't just about war. It was about what ordinary people could do when they believed their work mattered. When a nation trusted its citizens not just to fight, but to create. Years later, when Harper passed away peacefully in his sleep, the fragment of the Lucky Lady Two was found beside him. The museum that displayed it called it a symbol of courage. But those who had heard his story knew better. It wasn't courage. It was connection, the invisible bridge between hands that build, hearts that endure, and skies that remember. At the museum dedication, Ellen spoke briefly. Her voice was calm, steady. "My husband once said that machines can't feel," she told the crowd. "But he also said that when you build something with hope, you give it a soul." That's what those planes had. Not just steel, but soul. As visitors passed the glass case, children pressed their faces against it, staring at the dull gray metal. To them, it was just a piece of an old airplane. But to those who understood, it was a fragment of a story, one that began in fire and ended in faith.